Good morning, it's me again. I think probably most of you know me, but anybody watching online that don't, I'm Peter Williams. I'm one of the licensed lay ministers here. And we're in the middle of a series of teaching, our talks, our sermons, about meeting with Jesus. People who met with Jesus primarily after he died and rose again, and the great change that was in their lives. And in the first service, I was a little limited by time, and I was a little limited by the fact that nobody at that point knew who was going to be our new rector. But I'm in the glorious position now of not being time limited, and you do know who's going to be the new rector, and I'm going to dish the dirt. We're going to hear a lot about 180-degree turns. We've seen the drama of Paul and his complete turnaround to go back in the opposite direction. Well, when we as a preaching team, Sam's on the preaching team, were talking about this, Sam kept talking about 360-degree turns. And as a primary school teacher and pedant, I had to point out that a 360-degree turn meant that you actually carry on going in the same direction. So we're talking about 180-degree turns this morning and how Jesus brings about 180-degree turns in so many people, metaphorical turns. Saul was actively anti the people of the way, the Christians. As we'd heard in the drama by what I call the young people, thank you young people, they were all about, they were all certainly over 25, weren't they, apart from whoever was at the back. The young people acted out the drama, and we saw that he did a complete turnaround from actively going out of his way to harm physically and emotionally Christians, to the point of being implicit sometimes in their murder. Or actually, in the case of Stephen, who was the first Christian martyr, not even implicit. He was directly involved in Stephen's murder. And we saw the drama, the turnaround, the change around. And we still have some sayings based on that event, don't we? We've got, he's seen the light, or he's blinded by the light. That's a phrase that comes just from that story. Or if you're a Radio 4 listener or a Times reader, you might know the word Damascene, complete Damascene turnaround. But our reading in a few moments, which Sarah, I think, is going to come and read to us, is a bit strange in some ways, because it's not the actual story of Paul's moment of conversion. That happens, I think, in Acts chapter 9. This reading that we're going to hear is 13 chapters later. And by this point, Paul has been on several missionary journeys, voyages. He's had a shipwreck, amongst other adventures. He's sent loads of letters to different churches and groups of people which have become part of our New Testament. And he's had a real life of adventure. And now he's back in Jerusalem. And he's in conflict with the authorities because at one point he tried to introduce some Gentiles into the Jewish congregation. And the more formal Jews didn't like that. So our reading is not the story of Paul's conversion, but it's the story of Paul defending himself to the Jews. He's in fact giving his testimony. He's telling his story, the story of his own conversion. So Sarah, would you like to come and read for us?
Brothers and fathers, listen now to my defense. When they heard him speak to them in Aramaic, they became very quiet. Then Paul said, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city. I studied under Gamaliel and was thoroughly trained in the law of our ancestors. I was just as zealous for God as any of you are today. I persecuted the followers of this way to their death, arresting both men and women and throwing them into prison, as the high priest and all the council can themselves testify. I even obtained letters from them to their associates in Damascus, and went there to bring these people as prisoners to Jerusalem to be punished. About noon, as I came near Damascus, suddenly a bright light from heaven flashed around me. I fell to the ground and heard a voice say to me, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" I asked. "I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting," he replied. My companions saw the light, but they did not understand the voice of him who was speaking to me. "What shall I do, Lord?" I asked. "Get up," the Lord said, "and go into Damascus. There you will be told all that you have been assigned to do." My companions led me by the hand into Damascus, because the brilliance of the light had blinded me. A man named Ananias came to see me. He was a devout observer of the law and highly respected by all the Jews living there. He stood beside me and said, "Brother Saul, receive your sight." And at that very moment I was able to see him. Then he said, "The God of our ancestors has chosen you to know his will and to see the righteous one and to hear words from his mouth. You will be his witness to all people of what you have seen and heard. And now, what are you waiting for? Get up, be baptized, and wash your sins away, calling on his name." When I returned to Jerusalem and was praying at the temple, I fell into a trance and saw the Lord speaking to me. "Quick," he said, "leave Jerusalem immediately, because the people here will not accept your testimony about me." "Lord," I replied, "these people know that I went from one synagogue to another to imprison and beat those who believe in you. And when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I stood there giving my approval and guarding the clothes of those who were killing him." Then the Lord said to me, "Go, I will send you far away to the Gentiles." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Sarah. So here we have Paul telling his story, giving his testimony, sharing his experience of meeting with Jesus, and he doesn't pull any punches, does he? He tells his own worst. We all, every one of us in here, one way or another, has an experience of meeting with Jesus. And therefore, like Paul, we all have a story to tell. It won't probably in any way be the same as Paul's. It won't probably in any way be the same as the person sitting next to you. Every single person's story of meeting with Jesus is different. But there are some things we can learn. Firstly and foremost, and actually the title I was given, for the subtitle for this talk is, "No one can be written off. Everyone's story is valid." Paul's past was horrendous. As I've said, as we know, as we heard, he was a vigilante. He was an abuser. He was a murderer. He was arrogant. He was unbending. And probably worse than I've described. And yet, as we know, the impact of his conversion, of his 180-degree turn, led to the spread of the Christian church throughout the world. It's led to the writing of much of the New Testament, from which we learn of Jesus. It led to the development of our doctrine, our beliefs. And most importantly, it's led to the conversion and the salvation of so many people across the ages. No one can be written off. Not this guy, John Newton. Does anybody know who John Newton is? He did. But before he did that, before he became a minister, as shown in the picture, he was a blaspheming, womanizing, drunken sailor. He started off life being press-ganged into the Navy. He then took on being a ship owner in his own right. Not only a ship owner, but somebody who sailed the Atlantic trading in men, women, and children. He was a slave trader. He put them in shackles. He allowed them to die on his boats. All for greed, great greed, huge sums of money. John Newton, not a nice guy. But he underwent a dramatic 180-degree change. He had an experience of meeting with Jesus, and his life was transformed. And he became, in his whole life, a complete slave abolitionist. He stopped trading in slaves, and he turned and fought against slave trading. Politically as well, he was part of the abolitionist movement. And because of his turnaround, and because of his work, men, women, and children were saved from slavery, freed from being slaves. And he has also had an influence on a great many people, even in modern days throughout the world, because, as you said, he was the man who wrote the song, Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. He had a story to tell. We have a story of being lost and found again. Perhaps not as impactful as his, but we have a story to tell. Or have you heard of this guy? To be honest, I hadn't heard much about him. Does anybody know who he is? Apart from the name that's at the bottom. He's called Lecrae, and he's a modern-day rapper. He grew up on the streets in America as a gangster. He tried and traded almost every sort of drug going. He was into gang violence, leading gangs to kill on the streets. And certainly he was the master of victimization of people in his community. Not a nice person. And yet he too met with Jesus and had a complete 180-degree turn. And he became probably the world's foremost Christian rapper. Still is, writing songs. He's still dancing, and he's still rapping. And hundreds and thousands of secularized young people, particularly in America, but all over the world, listen to his lyrics, watch his art, and hear the words of the gospel. And he's formed charities and foundations to help those from the world that he came from. He says that his mess is his message. He tells his story, the story of when he met Jesus and how Jesus brought about for him a complete 180-degree transformation. He has a story to tell. You have a story to tell. Well, this guy, the video.
Have you ever heard the saying that once you're an addict, you're always an addict? Well, on the 17th of May 2007, my book was released, and I gave it this title on purpose: Once an Addict. Why? Because I was once an addict, and now I'm clean. Actually, 24 years clean. I was an addict for 15 years, and I met 3 people who were Christians. One of them invited me to church, so I went. That day, I was prayed for at the end, and I had a light bulb moment. That was when God jumped in to my life. And from that point on, my life totally changed. For years, my world was the underworld. And then I had this light bulb moment, so I needed to adapt to the new life that God had planned out for me. I started going to the Bible studies at church. I started going to the prayer meetings at church. I remember sitting around a dining table to have a meal. I never did that. Certain daft little things that I needed to adapt to. And I'm still adapting now. You could be in a similar situation to me. You see, I was changed and I've stayed changed. No matter what your addiction is, that same God that jumped into my life, He can jump into yours. My name's Barry Woodward. I was once an addict, and now I'm clean.
Barry Woodward's the guy that Ruth talked about at the beginning of the service, who's coming to the Salvation Army in Clitheroe next week, 7th of June. He's telling his story of a complete 180-degree transformation, of meeting with Jesus and being changed. And it'd be wonderful to go along and listen to him and how he changed. Take somebody with you so they can hear the story too. We all have a story to tell. No matter what twists or turns, depths or difficulties, past problems, current problems, pains, cruelty, personality, no matter what pain or broken relationships, your meeting with Jesus is turning you around. And your story is also worth telling. Meetings with Jesus are always worth telling about. Perhaps they're not all, I'm sure they're not all as impactful as the 3 people who've been up there. My backstory is nothing like any of their backstories. It's probably quite normal. But we all have a story to tell. So let's quickly, not as quickly as we did in the earlier service, let's quickly look at some of the important things about telling our story the way that Paul did. Telling others the stories of our meetings with Jesus. Because that's what we're called to do, to tell others. First, we've seen and heard that no one is written off. Not one person's story is too bad or too big for Jesus to have changed them and to carry on changing them. Not one person's story is too big to tell, warts and all, because you're not telling the bad parts, you're telling how Jesus changed you. But nor either is anybody's story too small, because a little meeting with Jesus is just as transformational. So tell your story. Whatever it is, tell your story. Did you notice in the reading, it went past very quickly, that Paul actually addressed the crowd that he was speaking to in Aramaic? That was actually a little unusual because Paul's main language, although probably his birth language was Aramaic, his main language of speaking at the time was probably Greek or a version of it. But he was speaking to people in their own words, meeting with them on their own level. There's no need to find a special time or a special place or a special way to tell your story. of meeting with Jesus, tell it where you are. Tell it in the normal ways. Meet with people at their level. For me, that's probably a coffee shop or a walk with somebody in Manchester. For you, it might be a different situation. But tell it where you are. No need to find somewhere special. Just tell it where you are. Thirdly, Paul didn't actually know where he was going or what was going to happen next. In fact, he was going to be taken in chains after this testimony to Rome for 2 years and kept under house arrest. He didn't know that. Your story probably isn't finished. Mine isn't. We don't know what's going to happen next or where God's going to take us. But it's still worth telling the story of where God's got you to where you are now. So, tell your story. Tell of your meeting with Jesus, even if it's not finished. Fourthly, Paul was telling his story from a place of great difficulty. One of my problems is I always try and wait for things to be better. Let's not have people around until the house is tidy. Let's not go on holiday till we've sorted the diary out. And let's not do this until we've done something else. Paul didn't wait for things to be perfect before he told of his meetings with Jesus. Actually, when he told the story, gave his testimony that Sarah read, he was in shackles. He was in trouble. But he still told his story. So you, tell your story, even if things aren't perfect yet, because it's part of the story that you're in. And finally, Paul didn't know when he told his testimony, either here or he did it again actually in Acts 26, he didn't know how his audience was going to react or what they were going to do. But it didn't matter. He told his story. He told his story, warts and all, and then he left it to God. And that's where we are. We can tell our story of meeting with Jesus. We can tell our story of what he's done for us. But how the people we're telling it to take it is actually up to God. God, in his Holy Spirit, will work as he chooses. So tell your story as it is, warts and all, whether it's finished or not, whether your things are perfect or not. Tell your story of meeting with Jesus, and God will do the rest. So as you go out into the week, into the world, get alongside people at their level and tell your story. You've met with Jesus. Amen.